My talk today is supposed to be on the surgical side of applying for residencies. There's obviously a lot of overlap between surgical and non-surgical fields, and so it'll apply to a little bit of both, and then Saba will take over for the medical or non-surgical.
It's for the video.
Great, thanks. For the non-surgical specialties. Some of the sources that I took for putting this together were the National Residency Match Program's online report, and that's a very good thing for anybody who's applying for the residency match, just to take their time and look through and look at the numbers and look at your odds and see where you stand. I think that the more information you have, the better you're going to be and the better you're going to do in the process. The second thing was a great website that I found on the American Medical Students Association website. It was an article giving a step-by-step process or ways to enhance your own application for getting into a surgical residency, and I verbatim took a lot of their information and put them in my slides. Please don't report me for plagiarism, but that's what that was. And then I spent a lot of time actually talking to one of my wife's cousins, who's one of the residency directors at University of Cincinnati School of Medicine's Department of Surgery, Syed Arif Ahmed, so I appreciate that. The most important thing for you to decide in your second and third years of medical schools is, what kind of background do you want to go into in your medical career. It's not the most important thing, but one of the most important things. And you have to be honest with yourself. Do you want to be a surgeon, or do you want to be an internal medicine person, or somewhere in between? And I'm going to go over some of the options and some of the things to think about in a minute. And the big problem that a lot of people have is a lot of people don't have any clue what the differences are before you get into medical school. I mean, nowadays more people do rotations in college and things like that, where they'll spend some time with a physician, but a lot of us think of a doctor as our pediatrician and don't really understand the nuances and the varieties of what's available. So I'll quickly go over a couple things. But when you're making this decision, one of the critical things for you to do is to be honest with yourself. I mean, know your personality, know your interests, know your abilities, and know your life situation. And even then, it's a little bit of picking something out of an unfamiliar territory, because all of those aspects of you will change, and it's very hard to really know exactly what the fields entail. So when you look at your personality, are you a procedural person? Do you like doing things with your hands? Do you, or are you more the type of person who likes to listen to people's problems and try to sort through that and solve them? Do you mind being humiliated in rounds? And this kind of thing, surgical residencies used to be brutal, and they're becoming less so, but there's still an element of that. Are you comfortable with increased liability? And procedural fields definitely carry more individual liability. All of us as physicians are targets, but that's something you have to deal with, and it's something that you probably don't have any clue about at this point. And this last line came through about 2 weeks ago. I was starting to put together this talk. I fixed a really bad proximal humerus fracture, and when I went to change, I saw like blood had soaked through all my clothes, and it's like, oh, this is something you got to figure out ahead of time. What are your interests? I mean, if you've taken anatomy and physiology, which by the time you're applying for residency you obviously have, which did you prefer more? Did you like the intellectual side? Did you like the hands-on side? Did things like pus gross you out? Because if you're an orthopod or any kind of surgeon, you're going to deal with that stuff, and you're going to be cutting it and dealing with it. In my residency in Cleveland, the winters were very long and the days were very short, and this was my life. I mean, there was no windows. You don't see the outside world. You don't see sunlight from October to May. If you can put up with that, you should think about, and if you enjoy that kind of thing, that's a surgical residency for you. Look at your abilities. I mean, again, I'm asking the same question. Were you better at anatomy or physiology? Are you a klutz working with your hand? If you can't put together, basic things and don't really enjoy like that process, that should tell you maybe that's not what you want to do. This is becoming, again, less so as residencies become more humane, but fasting is good training for a surgical residency. When we were doing spine cases in my residency, there were times when there were like 8-hour cases. Literally, I mean, you'd come in the morning, if you grabbed a donut, and surgical residents are very good at eating donuts, you'd eat a bunch of those in the morning, and that would carry you through your whole day. In general surgery, as a medical student, I remember doing a Whipple and literally for 12 hours, we didn't leave that operating room. They've gotten a lot faster at doing Whipples, but so anyways, this is a cartoon of a guy with 2 left hands. Your life situation is important too. You have to recognize the economics of medicine a little bit. You know, how bad is your debt? Unfortunately, pediatricians, as valuable as the work they do, and you know, as much as we appreciate what our pediatricians did for our kids, they don't make a lot of money unless you're in very specific situations. Are you married? Do you have a lot of kids? I mean, can you afford to be in a residency for 6 years, 7 years? You know, what else is going on in your life? I mean, do you have parents who are elderly and need your help, and you can't be away to another part of the country for 7 or 8 years at a time? The 88-hour work week in residency has been a huge equalizer. It takes away the extremes of where, in my internship year on my transplant rotation, I did 1 week that was 135 hours and another week that was 130 hours. I mean, you can't do that stuff now, but it's still a situation where people typically do end up working longer hours in surgical residencies just because of the nature of what you're doing. So you have a bunch of different options. Don't limit yourself and think, oh, I mean, my life is either I become the internist who you know, my parents go to, or the pediatrician that I knew as a kid, or I become the general surgeon who operates 24/7. I mean, there's a whole bunch of options. If you're into procedural things, you have surgical specialties, you have gastroenterology, which is a medical subspecialty, invasive cardiology, also a medical subspecialty, invasive radiology. We have a radiologist at the surgery center that I do who operates more than anybody else I know. It's incredible the procedures he can do and how well he gets paid doing that. But he never did a surgical residency. There's non-procedural things, general internal medicine, general pediatrics, and even some of these things can now become procedural as the fields advance. There's in-between things. Anesthesia, I like intubating a lot. I mean, I think that's one of the best procedures you can do out there, but you have to have that type of personality where you put a person to sleep and then make sure that you don't fall asleep, and you're working away at them. There's intensive care, which can be very procedural. Emergency medicine, depending on where you practice, can be extremely procedural. There's options where you have very limited patient interaction. You can be a radiologist and sit in a dark room all day and read films, and you can do great work doing that. Again, anesthesia can be very limited patient interaction. And then there's some things that are completely patient interaction, like psychiatry. And again, even that has become a little bit more procedural. One of the critical things to realize, excuse me, is that when you start medical school, and even before that, is when you need to start preparing for your residency. Because as much as people think, oh, my hurdle is to get into medical school, and it is a big hurdle, and for those of you who've done it, mashallah, congratulations, you've made a big step, but that's just the beginning. The competition continues to be steep, and these numbers from the National Residency Match Program for this past year's match show that there was 26,700 something PGY1 and PGY2 positions and 38,000 applicants for it. Okay, so the competition does not end, and for some of the lucrative specialties, or the ones that are really popular, the match rates are relatively low. One of your future speakers, one of your later speakers and I were just talking about it, and these numbers are a little bit skewed though. There are only about 17,000 US medical graduates per year. So there are more residency spots, or PGY1 and 2 spots, than there are American medical graduates. But there's a lot of people from international medical schools who are applying, and there are people applying for second times also. So you have to do well in medical school, and really this is your chance. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. For competitive surgical specialties, I know in orthopedics at the competitive locations, you're looking at 230 or higher for your USMLE scores for Part 1. You want to be in the top third to half of your class. AOA membership is very highly regarded, and you want to really work hard to make sure you get honors in your surgery rotations. This is stuff that we'll address later. So how do you work on this in medical school to boost your chances of getting accepted to the subspecialty that you want? One of the key things, one of the things that RF, my wife's cousin, mentioned, and other people have mentioned too, is find a mentor early on. When you're doing your early clinical, when you're doing your early non-clinical courses, anatomy and physiology and stuff like that, try to also get some clinical faculty who you can meet with. If you have an idea that you want to be in surgery, just go to a surgery grand rounds. Half of them are at 6 in the morning, so you'll be able to get there before class. And go listen to some people talk. When you find somebody whose personality clicks with yours, or somebody who does a subspecialty that you're interested in, just go up and talk to them and ask them if you can do a research project or a paper with them. And this can make a huge difference. For women who are interested in this, it's really important to find some female surgeon mentors. I can't tell you what it's like for a woman to have a baby, be pregnant in a residency or her practice, and then go back and build her practice again, which is essentially what has to happen. These are very difficult things, and they're tough decisions, and the more information you have, the better quality decision you're going to make. If you can do some time with a surgeon outside of your rotations, you can get a better idea of the field. Be involved in other stuff. I mean, unfortunately, one of the things that I used to say when I used to interview a lot was that we try to find the most well-rounded people that we can so we can beat that well-roundedness out of them and make them only physicians. But, I mean, that's very important. We want people who can do multiple things and can multitask. Study very hard. There's no excuse for not trying your best in medical school if you work that hard to get there. And that summer between first and second year is really your only free summer. So, find something valuable, whether it's a relief mission, whether it's research, whether it's something that will get you more exposure. You want to build your resume in that summer. When you get to years 3 and 4, do a lot of reading, including in journals. I mean, a lot of us read a lot of textbooks, but the stuff that's the latest and greatest out there, and it's not even the latest by the time it gets to the journals, is what's going to sustain you. And one thing that I learned from one of my residency code partners, a guy a year ahead of me, he read 2 articles every night before he went to bed. And the rest of us were always struggling with literature, but this guy knew the literature so cold that the attendings used to ask him what was the latest. And it sounds like it's not a lot, 2 articles a night, but that's 720 something articles by the end of the year, and he was religious about it. So work hard and really take initiative with your residents and your attendings. I mean, go out, be the guy who's the first person out there, guy or girl who's the first person out there getting labs and getting eyes and O's on patients. Learn your patients as much as you can. Learn your surgical cases. Don't show up being clueless, and definitely in residency don't do that. That was the one thing, we expected that if we showed up clueless to a case, you were going to sit in the corner. You weren't going to do anything in there. It's kind of funny that we now have to say this, to make sure you have some night call and trauma experiences. That was normal. I mean, you're going to be doing that if you're doing medical or surgical subspecialties. In your 3rd year, you want to make sure you find some program directors and or surgery advisors or rotation directors to help guide you a little bit and get in the process of hooking up with people who are going to later write your recommendations. It's important that they know you well. And if you're interested in surgery, just make sure that attendings and residents know that in the surgical specialties. You don't have to do that on your medicine rotation. Don't flaunt it. And do a sub-internship in surgery and really do well on it. This stuff we'll talk about a little bit more. But this is also critical. I mean, try at the end of your 3rd year and the beginning of your 4th year, if you have a lot of elective time, try to find out about different subspecialties. It's very hard to make a real decision on what subspecialty you like because your information is going to be limited. And the little window that you see on a rotation is not really the whole field, but you want the most information that you can get. And so please try to look hard at that. And then also really spend time talking to residents and medical schools in your school. I mean, these people are your friends, and they can look out for you, and they can give you advice, and they just went through the process. The critical thing from my standpoint, though, above and beyond all else, is be the best medical student you can be. I mean, you've been given an opportunity that millions of people across the world would give everything for, and so don't waste that opportunity. As far as research goes, if you can do it, it's really helpful. It's critical in some of the surgical subspecialties to have some research background because they're going to expect you to do it in residency. If you can hook up with a mentor who can either get you a clinical or a benchtop project early on, and you can continue it through all 4 years, that's wonderful, and that would be ideal. So start looking early. You know, get involved in the work. Don't just be the lab rat. Be the guy who thinks about the concepts and, you know, how to design projects, and learn that process. It'll serve you well later. And that's an area that I was particularly weak in, although I did it. I mean, nobody told me this, and I should have figured it out myself, but I didn't do the design part. It later became more difficult for me to try to do research. Your goal, and you know, you should be a goal-oriented person in medicine. I mean, don't just show up. I mean, think about what you're doing when you do residencies. Your goal is to get publications and presentations. Nobody cares if you spent 4 years in a lab if at the end you produce zilch, okay? And it's difficult to do. It's difficult to say this and tell people to do it, but I mean, you have to look at that. If it doesn't look like it's going to work, go find someplace else to work. And if you do research, you know it well enough that you can describe really well what you did in your interviews, which will later come up. These are basic things that are going to be addressed later, more so that, you know, what are your goals? Academic, private practice, and I know that Dr. Numani is going to be given a